Hello and thanks for joining me for some more landscape photography. A bit later on I'll be taking you down to one of my local beaches for a sunset shoot. But before that, let's just take a look at a couple of images that I've captured over the last few weeks since my last video. Now this first one, as usual, is from a dog walk where I've got my little EM5 Mark III with me. And there were two things that encouraged me to capture this particular image. Firstly, that it was an unusually still day. It's very rare for the Irish Sea to be as flat as a mill pond, and I was actually asked by one of my followers whether this was one of my handheld multiple exposure blends, but no, it's a single exposure. It really was that calm and still. Now the second reason I took this shot is because this beach is really interesting. It's southwest facing and is usually getting pounded by surf, and what that means is from week to week the sand profile changes, and that's what creates these lagoons at mid-water, and it was the shape of that water on the sand that I thought was quite interesting. Now this second image is from a tuition day out with a client. This was me demonstrating a possible composition looking down the Ogwen Valley from below the summit of Crimpii near Capelkirrig. I thought I'd share it with you because as you can see, the drama in the sky and the little slashes of light down in the valley show you that we got really lucky that day, and the chap that I was with got some great images too. And then this last one, which is quite recent, I shot this again at the beach at Aberfraw on Anglesey, and it's an area of rocks that I often sit on about halfway around my 2 and a bit miles dog walk. But it's very rarely got any seawater around it. This was a high spring tide and I knew it was going to be high tide, so I took my tripod with me, which gave me the luxury of a low ISO on this particular shot. Or from early morning to late evening, and we're going to head down to my local beach. It's quite late because the sun doesn't set until about 10 o'clock, but that does mean that I've got plenty of time to enjoy myself. It's an absolutely glorious summer's evening here, middle of June on the island of Anglesey. And I've just kind of come out on a bit of a last minute thing. I looked out the window and thought, what a lovely evening. So let's go down the beach with a camera. I've come over a little distance from home to the village of Rhosneigr, and I'm at the southern end of Traeth, Llydan, which is also known locally as Broad Beach, rather unimaginatively because that's what it is. There's not much movement in the sea, unfortunately, but on the plus side, that does mean that I'm not getting blown around, which is usually the case when I'm on the coast of Anglesey. Haven't got anything specific in mind, about an hour till sunset, so I'm just going to hang around this little rocky area. I'm not going to walk too far, I'm going to base myself here. What I have got, which is something that I always like to work with, is a high spring tide, and we're about an hour and a half or so away from that high tide. So it's going to be slack water about half an hour after sunset. And what that means is that the sort of compositions that I've got in mind shouldn't change too much in the next hour or so. So it does give me time to scout something out. But as I said, nothing specific in mind at the moment. So we'll see if I can find anything worth sharing with you. The light's a bit harsh at the moment, so even though it looks like on some of these rocks there's some quite nice side light, it's not really coming together yet. So I'm in no rush at all. Probably just sit on a rock for half an hour and enjoy the view. There might be some potential, but I think one of the problems I've got these days, and perhaps why I actually don't do a huge amount of photography these days, I've almost set my bar too high. I look at an image that I'd have been really happy to capture 2 or 3 years ago and find myself thinking, no, it's really not all that. That said, I still enjoy it. I still enjoy being out and about, and of course you just never know what you're going to get thrown at you. There's a big bank of cloud, some high cirrus. What that means is that whilst I'm going to lose this harsh light pretty quickly, the sky might colour up and I can then take advantage of that. And even though these rocks at the moment are in deep shadow, that won't be a problem so much when I'm not contending with an extremely bright sun right behind my targets. As you can see, my camera's some way off. Every so often a wave breaks across behind the tripod. I don't want to get my feet too wet. I'll dash out and grab it later. But I might be testing the limits of my camera insurance here. What I've done is I've set up a sort of longish exposure. I've got that thread of rock in the background, but what I'm particularly interested in are the textures as the water comes in these rocks in the foreground, then runs in through that gully. I'm shooting really wide, about 11 millimeters. I've got my 8 to 25 on f4. I'm also testing the limits of this remote shutter speed of about 3 seconds at the moment, f13, 3-stop ND, polarizer, all the standard stuff for this sort of shot. But what I'm looking for is when the waves dip in amongst those little boulders, and then you get a little surge that runs up in through that gully, just like that one. It's the textures in the water that I'm interested in. Got a bit of colour coming in the sky. The sun's gone behind a huge bank of cloud. It was like somebody threw a switch, so don't think I'm going to get anything spectacular in that direction. But projected across the other side of the sky, there's quite a nice pink tinge on the horizon over the Clean Peninsula, so that might work out. But I was forced back by the tide, and what I've done now is I've actually got this whole little bow tie shaped piece of rock as my main subject. It's still a really simple composition. It's really just about capturing the atmosphere of this location on this particular evening. I'm currently shooting at about half a second, and it's taking a shot every half second at the moment. And that'll allow me to pick the best patterns of the water. And I've probably taken, I don't know, 100 exposures. Probably end up blending 2 or 3 of them together, I think. This evening light is absolutely beautiful. I mean, we're still a good while before sunset, another 20 minutes or so. But it's behind a cloud, so it's kind of blue hour now. I've taken my ND off because I don't need that at the moment. Still shooting at f13, not afraid to use aperture at all. I'll quite happily stop down my aperture anytime I want to control my shutter speed. And that's getting me a half a second at the moment, which is just about perfect for what I've got in mind. And my feet are wet because I got drenched retrieving the camera earlier. Well, I'm dodging the incoming tide again. I'm also testing how waterproof my tripod accessory pouch is. So far it's stood up quite well because it's actually got swamped a couple of times. It's still dry inside. So hats off to the Wandered Small Tech pouch. I'm now shooting into where the sun went down, so I've got some really nice colour and texture in the sky. But as you can see, looking right along the surf line here, what I really like is the way that there are lots of really small pebbles sitting on the wet sand, and as the waves run back off, that's when you get these lovely bits of texture as the water runs over. Shooting at a 20th of a second this time. But by getting down really low, you've got the waves right under the lens. So it makes it quite dramatic. Lots of lovely high coloured cirrus in the sky as well for added interest, and that light is reflecting off the water. So even though I've got it polarised, I've still got plenty of light actually bouncing off the water. Lovely warm golden colour. A little bit of rock in the far distance and the houses of Rhosneigr running down. I'll leave them in the shot, they're completely irrelevant, but oh, I've been taken from behind. I think that's probably it for tonight. Lights dropping fast, and I don't think I've got, I don't know, a couple of hundred exposures here to wade through, so plenty to work with in post. Here comes a slightly bigger wave. Let's just hit that one. As you can see, it's absolutely glorious evening. Not the most spectacular of sunsets, but couldn't care less really. It's just nice to be out, as I said earlier. I think I'll leave it there for this one. See if we've got any images to show you at the end as usual, but for now, thanks ever so much for joining me. I really hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, why not subscribe and join me next time. Cheers.